Hello and welcome to my cellar. You know, it's funny, every time I say I'm going to make this one shorter than the last one, and it doesn't happen. So once again, we'll see what happens tonight. Let me move up a little. Okay, if a character wanted to enchant an object themselves, yeah, it'd be okay, enchanting yourself. Well, you do enchant yourself when you blast and stuff. Anyway, an object themselves or create some sort of new magical creature, how would you go about it? Well, this is a case where I would have the player of this PC write me out exactly what it is they're trying to accomplish. And, you know, enchanted sword that it, +1 to hit and extra damage because it's really, stays sharp, or, whatever. Exactly what they want to achieve. And then you as the DM decide what it's going to take. Now, you can get real granular. I love that word that somebody used last week. You can get real granular and say, okay, you got to have a black pearl, a black star sapphire, and a flawless ruby. Or you can say you got to have, it's going to cost you 37,000 gold. Or, okay, I mean, you can get into the real gravel, the grit, or you can take it a little more abstract. How would you go about it is however the DM of that campaign says it has to be done. That's how you go about it. If you came to me and said, I wanted, for instance, I had a player that created all these permutations on a fireball spell. And every time he came to me and said, okay, now I want one that's going to, you do, in such a size. And okay, it's going to take you 3 weeks of research and, whatever. And just assign it. And now you can't be wildly illogical on this, though, there again, we're looking at the thorny issue of applying logic and fantasy. But you have to be fair about it. And once you establish a cost, a length of time, etc., then you have a baseline from which to go. I was okay with it, and they would say, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that, and we did a lot of that, and it took time. But then we had we had multiple characters, we had multiple time. We could do that kind of thing. It was convenient in that we were on a quarterly system. We could have we had breaks at the quarters. And so all that healing and stuff all got done while we were on hiatus, and came back and took up the campaign again. So we were fortunate in that regard. We mostly adhered to the healing and things, resting up, the lapse of time while studying, etc., over the breaks. If some strange cosmological event that happened 3-4 times a year that just made it more conducive to study and healing. Creature. This is something I try so hard to understand and can't. There are so many creatures of myth and lore and legend and stuff you can make up yourself. A magical creature? That would that would involve a whole lot more of everything than I would assume a PC in a campaign would have or could invest. To create the simulation of life would take enormous cosmic forces focused and charged. And come on, think of the good and the bad novels and short stories that have been written regarding that. And would it turn on you at some point in time? I mean, shoot, go to Shelley and Frankenstein. Everybody feared it, but it really wasn't all that nasty until provoked. I don't know. All right, since you mentioned it, time travel where the characters rescue Joan of Arc from being burned would be cool, pun intended. Original 1989 movie Bill and Ted's Adventure should be top movie hits for good D&D campaign for time travel. Okay. This all assumes that your campaign and your world are based from our present day reality. I don't recognize our present day reality as having anything to do whatsoever. So if you did this time travel and you went back and you found a mob of filthy, smelly English soldiers burning this, little girl at the stake, then you could set out to rescue her and all that, but good luck on that. I mean, there's a lot of, nasty soldiers on both sides. It would be interesting. Time travel only has relevance to our timeline on this planet, on Earth. I don't use anything from Earth except the mythologies. I really don't. Everything else is stuff that I've lifted from other stories, other people's, concepts and ideas. So time travel only pertains if it's a world based on knowing who these people are to rescue and save. Otherwise, all you see is a really big hostile army surrounding this big pile of wood with this little girl on the top. How awful good do you have to be to sacrifice your life? Okay. I put the Cur and Curmudgeon on my business cards. If you do, I want 10 cents every time you get a laugh, and I want 3 cents every time you hand one out. Seeing as how I'm the Curmudgeon, and I coined the phrase for my friend Tom Tullis. Dragnet 87, the movie with Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks, was what I was thinking of. Was probably a parody of the old stoic dorky cops of the 50s. Well, yeah, now it would have been a better idea if you'd put Dragnet 87, and then I'd have known you were talking about the spoof. Okay. On the Dorks of Yore video, you said something about Gary not being into magic users. Did he change his mind later? I mean, how do you explain him having the magic user Mordenkainen? Okay. Yeah, I didn't speak as clearly as I could have when I explained that way back then. Gary nerfed the magic users because he knew what he could do with one if he didn't. He did not want campaigns dominated by magic users. He wanted the supreme lords of campaigns to be fighting men. Conan, whatever, I never denied that he liked playing. I mean, he's got a wizard character that's forever stranded on the Warden. Might even be Mordenkainen, I'm not sure, but it might be. He played wizards, yes. But playing wizards, he knew how easy it would be to dominate the game and so he nerfed them. He still did well with them, but hell, he wrote the game. Wouldn't you expect him to? I didn't explain it well when I first was asked about that. Yes, he played him, and I didn't even mention that. And back then, that Dorks of Yore thing, you might notice, was like 2.5 hours long. So I don't know what part of it came of, but yeah, he liked playing them. He had several, but he nerfed them because he knew what could be done with them to overrun and dominate the campaign. And then it's just War of the Wizards. Where's that fun? On the topic of keeping track of supplies as well as healing, I have a funny story about that from the first D&D venture that I DM'd. Well, I wish you would have shared it because you didn't, and you just left us all hanging there. Okay, I'm curious how you handle fatigue when battle takes many, many rounds. Do the PCs get tired? If so, how do you handle it? All right, what's a round? A minute? Okay, and you play 10 6-second segments? Okay. 7-8 minutes of vigorous swordplay would be very tiring. No doubt about it. However, 7 or 8 rounds of swordplay or weapons play or spell exchanging could also be very physically abusive. It's a case-by-case basis. You rest a few minutes. You rest up. I've always encouraged players to find a secure room and rest for a little while. Get a hit point or two back. I've always allowed, if you get a full night's rest, you get you get a certain number of hit points back automatically in a multi-day adventure. Depending upon the adventure and the number of hit points the characters have, and et cetera, maybe roll a d6 or 2 d4s or something like that. Based on the average roll of what you get some hit points back. Fatigue comes into play when it's extreme, and I would just, in those occasions when it comes in, right now, in my Wheel of Blame, they can have some long, wicked battles, but when they've accomplished the goal, they're transmitted, teleported, whatever. They get I described the feeling, and they're not completely cured, but they're not tired anymore. They carry their hit points, but they start out fresh and hale. I think hit points were called luck points in the original Braunstein game, based on what is stated in the Barons of Braunstein rules, which is kind of an homage to the original. I call them HP for hero points in my campaign. Yeah, I think you might be right. I don't claim to be a student of I don't know a lot about the Braunstein. A lot of that came out after I left TSR when I wasn't in the industry, and so it's not everything that I've caught back up on. Pardon me. Okay. All right, here we go again. This is touches on something earlier. Earlier commenter asked a very good question regarding creation of magic items. On page 6 and 7 of Men and Magic, it says wizards and the above may manufacture for their own use or for sale such items as potion scrolls and just about anything else magical. We don't really get any more until first edition enchanted item skill. Enchant an item spell. I guess my question is, if I wanted to create a +1 sword in OD&D, how would I do that? Okay, basically I already answered that. Yes, it was very vague. When Gary and Dave created this game, they had no concept of what it would actually become. A risable force in public entertainment and the social vernacular and the effect on culture. No idea. If they did, they wouldn't have believed it. Neither one. If they had known about the spawning of rules lawyers and nitpickers, they might have shot it in the crib. Yin, yang, sweet, sour. They left it vague because they mistakenly thought, and this is not a criticism of the gaming public. This is more criticism of the authors. They thought everybody had the same background they did and would be able to make this stuff up out of whole cloth. I don't really think that Gary realized that not everybody could just think up stuff like he did. Some maybe, but he expected more could do it like he could. And I think Dave was the same way. Keeping in mind that they were kind of the leaders of their packs and used to teaching newbies and bringing along and nurturing younger gamers. I don't think they had any idea how demanding of detail and finesse it would become. Let's face it, it's only been through much public discourse that it's been refined to where it is today. All right. This is really long, and I'm going to skip over parts of it. I didn't do a good editing job. In at least one of your old videos, you said something to the effect, we didn't go into clinical depression when our player characters died. We either grabbed another one of the DM's pre-gens or grabbed a bunch of dice, pencil, black record sheet, and started rolling. That's the attitude I like, but when I was 10 or 11, the character was like my alter ego. Okay, I understand that. But, again, keep in mind that what we were writing were rules that we hoped would attract other miniatures players who were mostly older. You had to have money and time to be a serious miniaturist, money to buy them and time to paint them, or more money to have somebody else paint them. We never aimed this at 10 or 11-year-olds. There were no 10 or 11-year-olds playing back in those early years. Those first 3 years, late 73, 74, 75. Okay, I learned in 74 and started in 74. My first campaign was the fall of 74. So we weren't looking at the ego transference that might occur. We being miniatures players previously, had been doing a form of mild ego transformance whenever we got down to the table. And yeah, that's the command stand, and that's my figure, We've been doing that forever. Not developing personalities and knowing how many hairs circled his belly button, but we had been transferring some ego there. Yeah, 11 or 12-year-old. You're, pardon me, living vicariously. I can understand where it hurts. Okay, now we're going to skid around and, okay. Okay, what about happens? What about mid adventure deaths? How do you handle that? More goes on, but okay. It depends on the game. Face it. If y'all having fun and it's a mild, we're fresh into the dungeon, and you haven't been playing, longer than exploring some, and a mishap occurs. We had a lot of tongue-in-cheek solutions. Less than an hour into the game, oh damn, your cousin Pat showed up. He caught up to you. He'd been following you, trying to catch up. Here he is. Oh damn, his cousin Bill's dead. Well, Pat'll go on with you. There's ways it can be done depending upon the severity of the concentration in the game. How serious is this? Now, okay, it's final showdown. We're gonna crack the lair of the Medusa tonight. We've got all, we're ready, we're prepared. We've got everything we can possibly think of, And an hour in, one of the PCs dies. Tough. Now, if the rest of the party says, "Oh hell no, we can't do this without Bob," then I guess you go back to town and problem solved. If you think you can't go on without Bob, okay. Bob can sit there at the table. No reason Bob can't vicariously enjoy what's going on, but Bob's got to shut his mouth. Bob can't say anything. And if you catch Bob rolling his eyes, make him leave. Because that's metagaming of the worst sort. Bob's ghost isn't down there telling him what, shouting down to him what. Well, hell, I don't know. It's your game. Let Bob's ghost speak to the group once in a while in vague phrases. This writer went on to say about having a ghost party or a mirror party running around and you get one. Nah, that's way too complex and way too much to keep track of. Essentially, two parties running around, and so again, it depends on the severity and when it happens. If it happens, it's 11:15 at night, and you traditionally break up between 11:30 and 11:45 because some of you have real jobs in the real world the next day. Play on without him and hope it doesn't hurt the party. Now, at the college in my campaign, we'd start at 10 in the morning and play till 5. And sometimes we start at 9 in the morning and play till 5. And we took a half hour out in the middle for lunch or somewhere around the middle. So we played long sessions. So as situations arose, I handled it ad hoc. As long as allowing the dead player back in isn't going to give the party a more of an advantage than they had before the player died, I don't see a problem coming up with some weird way to let them bring a character back. They can stumble on a ring, and it's written in common, some silly thing that summons a doppelganger. Have fun with it. On illusions and phantasms dealing damage specifically, I'd let PCs or monsters, NPCs, make a save each round they're attacked, or fight in melee an illusory opponent. Until they make their save, they take damage as if the illusion was real, but it's phantom damage. It goes away if and when they do save, and if they die, they just pass out, hallucinating that they've been killed. Maybe have a dream about the afterlife while they're out. And the next thing was a reply. That's pretty cool. I agree. That's a neat idea. Great imagination on dealing with it. I'd leave a certain percentage of the damage due to the shock to their system and what they believed had happened and the perceived flinching and whatever. I'd maybe leave 15 or 20%. But that's just me, and I have a reputation for being unkind. Okay. All right, here we go back to cures. And again, a rather long and lengthy and rambling. Cleric cure wound spells, healing potions, and Keotum's ointment, along with a ring of regeneration, were as forms of magic that magically restores set randomly determined number of hit points instantaneously upon contact or ingestion on wounded character. Okay, I'm not aware of this ointment, though I remember that Gary did salves and ointments. There was a point in time when we checked out all the books in the Lake Geneva Library on folk medicine. And we were thinking about doing an article for the magazine on folk medicine. And I don't know if we actually ever really did one or not, or if somebody else did one later. But, fine. So it's an item I'm unfamiliar with. Okay. Smear it on makes you better. Like I said before, healing potions, as far as I'm concerned, are like little 5-hour energy or Red Bulls, because they're restoring your ability to avoid the fatal blow. They're perking you back up. They're making you speedier, quicker to respond, etc. That's my interpretation. That's the way it works in my universe. Okay. It was understood as long as these magical healing methods are available, character would be scar-free and total repair towards whatever is broken. Understood is a tricky word. You can think somebody understood what you were saying and find out 10 minutes later that they hadn't a clue. As a former teacher, I can I can attest to that vicious fact. I don't ever remember anywhere in the rules saying that you would be cured, scar, and blemish free. If so, if it's out there, let me know. But I'm unaware of it. So there again, we're playing in fantasy. We have to. All right. I'm saying it leaves scars, battle wounds, dueling scars, whatever. If you took hits all the time, if you were actually having slices in your flesh, gobbets of meat carved out of you, and blood dripping all over the floors, you would be a walking cicatrice. non-magic first aid. Well, non-magic first aid is probably not going to be all that much good in the middle of something, but a first aid brewed out of herbs and spices and plants found in the wilderness, certainly I would let that work if, again, that player character had that kind of knowledge. All right, here we go on disbelief. This starts it. You can disbelieve and still raise your shield. That was a quote from last week. Response, no, you can't. Next reply was a comment, was a response. I agree with this. If you disbelieve, then you know it's not going to hurt you. Good point. And depending upon your philosophical bent, how fervently, how purely, how really, with a dash between the two L's, do you have to believe to be considered, doing it, and therefore overcoming the illusion if you're only half believing it. Just a point. Then, the next comment after that, perhaps the intention was you can disbelieve a particular element of a dangerous situation without losing sight of the fact that you are in a hostile environment, and therefore it might be best to maintain a protective stance. I think that hit it on the nail. So, you DM your way. I would buy this argument. Okay. All right, here's some of my foreign viewers. Thanks for all these videos. It's been great hearing how D&D started and all the anecdotes. I played in the early 80s in New Zealand. Still love the game, although sadly don't play now. I was wondering if you could describe how well the AD&D tournaments worked in those early conventions. I find the modules that are based on them really interesting, with the points awarded, etc. I'm sorry if this has been asked before, but I am listening to one of your episodes per day, and so far only up to 90. Looking forward to hearing your reply in about 3 months. Ha ha. I have touched on it. The problem was that no matter how well we called the people that wanted to help us volunteer, because they figured they'd get free stuff, and and they usually did, but no matter how well we could call them, we couldn't sit down and give them an 8-hour course on how we felt good play should be rewarding in this game. Even if we could, personal interpretation would have varied. Again, as the former teacher, I can tell you, you can say a word in front of 30 people and you'll get about 6 different interpretations or 6 different impacts. So it was determined that to keep these things going, we would make a successive tournament that would enable us to sign up many hundreds of players, and we did, and that we would give a rubric to each of the DMs and say, okay, did they do this? Did they do that? Did this happen to them? Did that happen to them? And literally the highest scorers, the ones that did the best according to the rubric that the measuring stick that we provided, they advanced to the next round. So it worked very well in that regard. It got rid of all the variations in the DMs, because DMing is a very subjective thing, and we try to make it a little more objective. Okay. What was the origin of the giant versions of smaller animals? Great cats and rock apes are formidable in their own right, but is the only reason to make a weasel or rat man-sized to make them a threat, or was there an inspiration from which they are drawn? I have a hard time explaining my world, but recently came up with a magic user, feeding an animal good at digging a potion that grows so that they would be used for excavation or mining, but then something went wrong. I love the idea of getting a digging, burrowing animal and growing it and making it your pet, but again, it could get away. The giant things, specifically a lot of the giant things in the first 3 Little Brown Books, were to fill out charts and tables, because how many monsters can we think of? More importantly, from those people who had read the appendix, more importantly, how many monsters could we put on the tables that the readers would recognize, not being into Scandinavian fairy tales or the complete Grimms or whatever? So rather than coming up with something out of a Slavic folk tale, well, a giant weasel with their nasty little tempers and their sharp teeth could be certainly formidable, and anybody could put in their mind's eye a giant weasel. There weren't a lot of recognizable monsters until we started. Dragon Magazine was putting out a new one every month there for a while. Boule, the Catoblipas, or Catoblepus, I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. We were putting out new ones just to give people ideas. That's why the Fiend Folio came out, to give more people ideas. Unfortunately, a lot of them weren't very good ideas, in my opinion. Let's see. What's next here? Whoa, we're getting through this pretty quick. And then a comment following it was King Kong, maybe. Well, yeah, King Kong was a giant ape, and everybody had heard about King Kong. Well, not everybody, but he was much more of a widely known feature in the culture, especially amongst fantasists and the people that went to the movies. All right, now we're going to get into a little philosophy. Do druids wear fur pelts? And there was a comment that followed. Well, the comment said that basically they would do it in a non-threatening way if they chose to. I don't see why they couldn't. I don't. If in your world they shouldn't, then they shouldn't. Are you going to define pelts as a bear? Well, is something a bear would wear, or the skin of a deer? The druid could take the deer for food and cure the skin, and it'll all be completely cool. A druid shouldn't go out hunting bears unless, nobody should go out hunting bears unless it's some God-driven thing or something like that. But if a really big bear was mistaken and attacked the druid, and the druid defeated it, well, then the druid's entitled to wear the fur. But the druid's not entitled to call all the beavers up out of the swamp with his druid powers and harvest them and sell them for their pelts and their tails. That would be kind of going against the whole druid vibe. And if you wanted to have your druid be a strict vegan, okay, not a problem. Now we're going back to I don't agree that all fantasy miniatures have to be any more complex than the mass production of the dirt cheap green and brown army men. Bull. Have you seen the green and brown army men? Really? They're very crude. They are more crude than the lead figures that I used to be able to make in my basement with two-piece molds melting down sinkers, fishing sinkers. They're more crude than that. I wouldn't, if you were to go into fantasy figures, they'd be so crude you'd have a hard time telling them apart. Sorry, they are what they are. Fantasy figures require being more detailed. Therefore, they're going to be more expensive. Also going to be more expensive because the demand is less. Sorry, that's the way it is. All right, here we go. This projectile healing silliness again. The idea of shooting people with healing supplies is inspired but psychotic, in my opinion. I agree, but does provide opportunities for some fun ideas. How about a cowardly and misanthropic herbalist who has no compunction to throwing glass balloons of healing drench upon his party mates, perhaps causing further damage but averaging out to some sort of net hit point game? Another nasty idea would be blow darts of buffing. Perhaps a taskmaster halfling attempts to drive the party mates on during battle by sticking them with magical blow darts. Obviously, this type of projectile ingestion would be distracting. Yeah, getting slapped in the back of the neck with a blowgun of healing stuff is liable to distract you, yes. And a cruel DM such as myself might say that that person who hadn't gone yet, here it is just round 3 of 10 in the turn, is now bumped back to 8 for the distraction. And what do you know, he got croaked on 7. Just a consideration. And then he points out that the difficulties of hitting a person involved in serious melee are great. Well, and good point here. While healing an enemy is a chance. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Especially if the DM was a cruel, ingenious person like myself who decided that particular species liked that stuff so much it had twice the effect. Now, it might be an amusing NPC, I'll grant you. But I wouldn't go any farther than that. All right, now we've come to the end of the stuff that I had on questions, and so now I'm going free form. Gaming post-COVID. Are we going to get the gang back together or make a new gang? And this is a serious question for role players, particularly. My board game group, who are have all played RPGs, but we don't RPG now together. Not since some of us since my old days at Yada Quest, finding guinea pigs for my modules I was writing, the adventures I was writing. That was a hell of a campaign, one adventure to another. Anyway, Wampler on Facebook, Jim Wampler occasionally, just recently, posts some of the stuff he drew that happened during the campaign. Anyway, we've gotten back together a couple times now. It's been great. Sitting around the table. Person to person, because we're all double vaxxed and everything. And it's just more fun exchanging insults and stabbing each other in the back in person. Because board games all involve that to one point or another, because only one person can win in a board game. So let's go to the RPG groups. I see a lot of conversation about getting a bad apple in the group. And not having been able to play person to person for all the length of time we have has suspended a lot of that. Now, not every group that went onto Zoom or Discord, those that did, this may not apply so much to you. Those who didn't, groups reform after any major event, major happening, major impact, any kind of group. If there's been, or forming a new group. If you've got, say, three friends that you all like to play the same way, you all have a similar mindset. You set out, say, okay, let's get together a new gang. You can audition players, and you can tell them it's an audition. And you can tell them in terms of, you don't have to be snooty and snotty about it. You can say, hey, let's tell you what, we're going to play next Wednesday. Why don't you come play with us, and let's see how we all get along with each other. Because they might not like the group might not like them. If you like them, give them a shot. And maybe they won't work out. Maybe they will. Once you've got I consider the ideal group, the ideal board game to be 5 or 6. And that's what I consider the ideal number of players. And so when everybody shows, we have 6, and we have games at 6 play. And when somebody can't make it, we have games for 5 and 4, and whatever. And it's a way to build up the group. Maybe you as a DM figure that you got to be there every time. Sure, if it's a suspended adventure, yes. If it's a fresh adventure setting off from camp or whatever, and one of the players can't make it, then it's up to the party to decide, the rest of the party, whether or not they want to do it without them. Life's tough. If they don't want to do it without them, for social reasons, for game reasons, for whatever, play something else that week. I don't want this to sound hateful, but this pandemic, this forced separation, has given some groups a chance to cull. Some people have fallen by the wayside by themselves. Take the opportunity to get a new group together. Take the opportunity to get the old gang together if you've already reached that point. Bringing new people into an existing gaming group is always fun and exciting, and I'm lying there. Sometimes they just do not fit. Other times they fall right in. And then there's the guys that first couple of times, they're a little diffident, you're a little diffident, but before you know it, it's like they've been there playing with you forever. COVID's finally releasing its grip. We're going to start going to conventions. I know the only one I know for sure right now is I will be at TotalCon 36 in February of 22. I'm hoping to go to Gamehole in the meantime, but don't know yet. Going to Gary Con after Total Confusion, Total Con. It's coming back. Don't be dumb. You know, if your old group, your pre-COVID shutdown group, has all been vaccinated, and you're all buddies still, and you get along and that, great. Set aside some time and do it again. You will not believe what you've been missing until you find out. And you thought, for those of you who, I know what I've been missing, you've been missing it even more. I'm going to record a podcast this Sunday called Epic Levels. I understand it's got music and on-the-spot monster creation, and we're going to create a level of a dungeon on the spot, and I can't wait to see if I can't get a weirder one than anybody's ever thought of. We'll see. Anyway, watch for it. And Dodada Govi.
Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when the race went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Tight with tramp under a tree, high as could be.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.